Welcome to the Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery at the Whisky Show. Throughout the week, we'll have sessions, live chats and videos showing on our booth. For your chance to win a set of all our whiskies to date, follow the link to sign up to our newsletter. The winner of this free prize draw will be announced on Friday 9th of October at 7:30pm. We'll always be live at 2pm, 4pm and 7pm, with special sessions throughout the week. Key dates for your diary are Friday the 2nd at 6:30pm, live tasting session with David and Joe. Saturday the 3rd at 4pm, we'll be in conversation with the Swedish Whisky Girl. Saturday the 3rd at 7pm, live tasting session with David and Joe. Sunday the 4th at 4pm, we'll be talking all things malt with Munton's CEO Tim and his team. Sunday 4th at 7pm, live tasting session with David and Joe. Friday the 9th of October at 5pm, discussing barrel-aged beer with Alex from Wold Top Brewery. And finally, Friday 9th of October at 7pm, rounding up and picking the winner of our free prize draw. And you can always ask us questions using the chat function. These films were part of our Field to Bottle Facebook Live series that we ran every Wednesday for 12 weeks over lockdown. They covered every aspect of our production, from field to bottle, each lasting around 30 minutes.
Hello to everyone who's joining us. Thanks very much for coming along to this one of our first Facebook Lives. So we're bang on 6 o'clock. We've got one person watching us, which is lovely. So thank you to you. And as a couple more people join in, we'll get cracking with the chat, good and proper. Tasting okay, Joe?
Yeah. Good. Nice to visit them again. I haven't tried these for a while.
Say that.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's all about this at the minute, isn't it? It's all about this.
It's all about Moscatel normally, but now we're going back in time, approximately kind of nearly 3 years to November 2017. Okay, so as people are joining in, we'll just get cracking on with the chat. So a quick introduction to who we are. So you've got me, I'm Jenny. I head up all the marketing and do the marketing for the Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery. And so I'll be here as a kind of questioner, judge, jury, whatever, asking questions, but also keeping Joe on the straight and narrow as we talk about Distillery Project 001 and 002 today. We've also got Joe Clark, who's our whisky director here at the Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery. He'll be chatting all things liquid and spirit. So a quick introduction to what it is that we're doing here. So we just had a jump of lots of people joining. So hello, everyone. Quick introduction. So obviously things are totally different at the moment. So we've been working out ways in which we can welcome you to the distillery without having to welcome you physically to the distillery. So what we're going to do every Wednesday for the foreseeable future, we've got a good few weeks of content lined up. We're going to be running Facebook Lives at 6 o'clock. They'll run for about half an hour. And we're calling them Field to Bottle, mainly because each week we're going to have a different topic which covers everything generally chronologically from field to bottle. So we're starting off with Distillery Project 001 and 002. Next week we'll focus on the farm and those kind of early elements in the farming stages of the process. So we'll be joined by Tom for that. And we'll just have kind of half an hour of chat, some tasting, some discussion. We strongly encourage and recommend and ask for any comments. So if there's anything you'd like to ask or any questions you want to know, whether it's related to the conversation or unrelated to the conversation, but not too unrelated, please, because you'll probably throw us off our chat and distract us immensely, however funny that might be. Just bob them into the comments section underneath here and they'll show up and we'll be able to talk about them. And I'll ask Joe when the time's right. So without further ado, today we're talking about all things Distillery Projects 001 and 002. So I'm going to hand you over to Joe to talk about what that actually means. What are Distillery Projects?
Sure. So yeah, these are our very earliest bottlings. This is the kind of first ever kind of thing we put out there. And obviously I've got the open bottles on this side as well. I thought these nice unopened ones so you could see them. But yeah, we kind of realised kind of early on when we opened to the public. So we opened to the public Easter 2017, and yeah, we started doing tours. So we'd have groups of kind of 10, 12, 14 people around the distillery, and yeah, you know, we were pretty brave early on. We put out 1-year-old cask samples at the end of the tour. You know, it was kind of, well, what are people going to try when they come and see us? You know, we're not a distillery that's made white spirits. I think a lot of you will be aware of that. But, you know, we don't do gin, we don't do vodka, we don't do liqueurs. So it was really what are people going to try when they come and see us? So we had 2 casks in particular that were on the warehouse floor that were tasting really good. So we kind of stuck our necks out and put them out for people to taste when they were coming around. One was cask 48, the other was a display cask, and a bit of new make spirit. And what we found really early on was people were coming to see us. They were tasting what we were making at kind of a year old, give or take, and they were really enjoying it. And you know, they were very, very, very keen to take it home with them. And at the time, all we could really say, it was myself and David doing all the calls back then, and all we could say was really, well, you know, we don't have any of this to buy, but you can buy a cask, which you still can actually. You can still buy a barrel now, but the whole kind of concept kind of grew out of that in a way. And yeah, we kind of cracked on, you know, looked at actually which of the casks are tasting really good, and what can we do with this, and what, you know, how are we going to do it? You know, how do you put out a spirit which is pre-whiskey? And yeah, we kind of got our heads together, and a kind of series of meetings, conversations later, we found the name Maturing Malt, which we all really liked. You know, I can't remember who actually came up with that first. I think we can give David credit for that. But it was a cracking. It just ticked the box. It was perfect. It just summed it up. You know, it's maturing malt spirit. So yeah, it was whiskey before it was whiskey. And yeah, we cracked on and we did our very, very first bottling. I remember we opened the pre-order start, I think, in November 2017, and we started getting it out of the door and shipped around December. And actually, I remember it very well because it was a weekend that we had this insane, massive storm blew over the country. It was like the worst weekend to do any shipping, and it kind of hit as we just sent this out. It was absolutely terrifying and annoying. But anyway, once it got out there and people were tasting it, it was very well received, and it's really interesting revisiting it now, I have to say.
So I'm just going to jump in there quickly and sort of take it back a bit of a step, because I think this might be interesting to a few people as well. So one of the things that I'm sure you all know about whiskey is that it can't be called whiskey until it's been in a cask for 3 years and been matured for 3 years, and that means that you really can't mention whiskey anywhere on the label for it. So whilst from a kind of customer point of view, it would have been really helpful to be able to essentially call it baby whiskey or almost their whiskey. When we spoke to the labelling regulations people, and we worked quite closely with the team at North Yorkshire County Council to make sure that we're not ever putting anything on any of our bottles that isn't quite right. Then we were kind of going back and forth about how we could do it. So you couldn't even say this spirit is on its journey to becoming whiskey or to becoming single malt. So there were quite a lot of challenges there. So maturing malt was a really useful term that we came upon because it summed it up so well without being able to use the crucial W word. The other thing that's interesting to note is that spirit has to fall into a certain category when you're selling it. So usually it's a grain spirit, or it's something else, or it's a vodka, or it's a gin. And then within each of those categories, there's specific classifications as well. So one of the things that we spoke long and hard with the team at North Yorkshire Council, and they spoke with counterparts at other counties around the country, in other counties around the country, to sort of make sure that we were towing the line and doing the right thing. And actually it was something that had never been asked before. And I remember the team at North Yorkshire suddenly saying, right, well, we're going to have to come back to you on that, because we need to talk to some people in Scotland. We probably need to talk to some people in Wales as well and find out exactly what they would say about it. And in the end, the decision was made that we, so on the back, I think it says maturing malt. So maturing malt spirit drink, that's it. So that's why that's on the back there. But we were able to negotiate with them that we didn't have to write spirit drink or grain spirit on the front of the bottle, because it was a proper malt and it had been made with barley using all the processes of single malt. So it wasn't any old grain or a mixture of grains, and we felt that was a really important differentiation to make on these bottles. So sorry, that's a slightly boring more marketing, packaging, promotional.
Just brought back so many memories, so many comments.
Just so many calls with that and going back over it. Some comments coming in now. So hello everyone. Thanks for the comments. Thanks Livy's dad for that too. So we'll kind of talk through, I think now we've talked about that a bit. Actually, some of the things on the names are really interesting. We wanted to create something that was interesting and collectible. Actually, we ended up making something a bit more collectible than we ever realized, because we had specific numbers per thing. And so we had people calling us every time we released a new distillery project saying, can I have number 1989 out of 2000? And then there were obviously people within the distillery as well who wanted to kind of collect specific numbers too. So we actually created something that we didn't really intend to do, which was quite nice and exciting, and a lovely sort of byproduct of it. Also, I could talk for hours about the labeling and how we decided to go with the gannet diving. We did some really exciting design work on that too, but I think that's getting carried away and we're going off topic. So rather than me telling Joe to shut up, I feel like I should be toning it down and handing back over to Joe to talk a bit more about that actual spirit that's inside the bottle, because that's the most important thing, really.
Yeah, it is. It's really interesting just revisiting all that process. Yeah, it was. It was a victory not getting spirit drink on the front. I remember that very clearly.
Yeah.
So this first one, it was a combination of 5 casks that made the cut for it. So the first 4 bottles in this series, marriages of casks. This was 3 bourbon barrels. So 2 bourbon barrels, a wine barrel, and a Oloroso orange sherry hogshead. It was of the series, it was actually the easiest one to put together, because I'd been watching these particular casks for quite a long time. And in terms of kind of having a shortlist already and a good idea of what was going to form the spirit in this bottle, there was some absolute crackers. Sorry, there was a Fino sherry hogshead in here as well. So it's 2 sherry barrels, wine barrel, and 2 bourbon. You can see from the colour. I mean, if anybody's got any bottles of these at home, they're pretty rare now. But you see the colour is quite dark, and so these casks were super, super active. But they just worked really, really well together. Really, really spicy, really, really fruity, more kind of wood driven. But it's still, the smallest casks we fill are 200 litres. Again, which is unusual. A lot of distilleries, if they were going to do something young like this, would have had it in a much smaller cask, because you get much more colour much quicker, and that kind of thing. But as you can see, we just didn't have to do that. So it was a combination of different casks, as they all were, but this was certainly more kind of wood-driven flavours than the second one. It absolutely flew. I'm just thinking back to it, so we did that pre-order. It was about 2,000 bottles of each of these, and I think half of them were gone pretty much within kind of 3 weeks, I think, of opening it up for sale. I'd be interested to see if anybody watching has actually got a bottle of this. Has anyone commented, Jen?
One of our team members, Libby, says 001 is her favourite maturing malt, so that's good to know. Hi, Libby. And actually, no, nobody else has said anything on that, but I can say that up here at the farm, I went for a bit of a hunt round to find the right bottles to see if we had any that I could drink, and actually one of them is so close to being empty that I'll get into trouble, I think, if I take the last drops, and another one is so full that it's not been opened, so I decided I wasn't allowed to open that, because that's definitely one that someone up here is saving for best. So it's interesting. I think now someone's actually asked if they can buy a cask of 001, which is a slightly different question, because it's a marriage of lots of different casks, as Joe's just been saying. But it's definitely become really, like, it's not, I mean, cult is a ridiculous word to use, but it's definitely got, I'm so arrogant as well, but it's definitely got something about it that got people really excited. And to be honest, it was the hook that brought people into the distillery, because as Joe said, we don't have a gin, we've never done a vodka or anything like that. It was a really nice way within that first 3-year waiting period to give someone a taste of something, especially if they're a bit too far away, to be able to come and visit the distillery themselves. We've got a couple of people saying in, so thanks, Darren Norton. He's got a couple of 001, one nearly finished and one opened. I think that's a fairly standard practice at the moment. And somebody else saying that it's still in their cupboard. So that's good to know. But I mean, definitely worth a try. That's something that we have lots of people saying to us about, as to whether they actually do open it, or whether they bought one to keep and one to drink and ended up drinking both.
Well, let me tell you, if you do decide to open it, it's tasting really good. We'd have never have put it in a bottle if we weren't really happy with it. But it's quite interesting. I think actually last time I was drinking this was the open day last year. Used it on a couple of classes back then, kind of revisiting the kind of the early days of the distillery. And it is, it's tasting really, really good right now. And I can remember spending an enormous amount of time with this, as everybody did when we released it, because it was the first spirit we put in a bottle. So it was such an exciting kind of moment for us, even getting getting the glass, getting the labels on, getting it all kind of put together. But yeah, I guess if you've got a bottle and you're not precious about kind of holding on to things for the future, then get it open. It's tasting great. I've got half a bottle here that I've had quite some time. I don't think it's going to be lasting too long after the back end of this tasting, to be honest. But yeah, really more wood driven. That was the idea with this one. So it was, again, combination of casks, and it was bringing those casks together to kind of form this kind of rounded flavor profile. Same to be said for the second, the third, and the fourth. So yeah, the second one was quite a different creature altogether. It was a much kind of lighter style of the project series. The one that was always kind of closest to our kind of house style, the whiskey, the Filey Bay whiskey that we released. It was always really, really the O2 bottling. It was certainly kind of lighter, fresher, kind of more citrusy, more kind of toffee kind of flavor profile, and kind of less sherry influence basically. So this was an odd one out in a few ways, mainly because it was more distillate driven in flavors, and it was actually utilizing fewer casks. So this was a combination of 5. It's a combination of 4. One of the casks in question there was a big sherry bot, and then it was the bourbon barrels, 2 bourbon barrels, and again it was one of the wine casks. Actually, the wine casks that I've mentioned here, they run through all of these bottles. They're these kind of really amazing wine casks, which we kicked the door open to some private ownership on them over the last kind of 12 months, really off the back of just how well these first 10 performed, built back in October 16. So the second one, lighter, much kind of lighter colour. Hold up, have a look at that. To the first one. So I'll just give you a bit of comparison. There we go. And just to make that out, it's a little bit tricky through that lens. But yeah, kind of lighter flavour profile. Have you got a glass of that, Jen?
Hi, sorry. Well, I've got the bottle of it. I actually haven't poured it into a glass just yet, but I was actually drinking this. Oh, hang on, I've lost Joe. Sorry, there we go. Sorry, I'm still slightly new to this, the software that we're using for this. So this is a 002, but this one came out in spring 2018. And actually over Easter, Joe and I were talking about kind of what goes well with some of those more traditional Easter treats. And that went very well with some hot cross buns, I can say. That really complemented all of those flavors. And it came out in spring 2018. And then, so actually there's quite a nice kind of springy type connection into that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's very much. I remember the casks were emptied. It was actually Tom and Dave who did the cask empty into this. I remember I shot up to a whiskey show in Glasgow that day, and I can remember Dave being on the phone going, "We're just dumping his cask. It's smelling absolutely incredible." When we were putting this batch together, but yeah, it was that time of year, and we've always certainly with these earlier bottlings, kind of. They were seasonal in a way, that was kind of pre-Christmas, deeper, richer, spicier. Whereas this was kind of coming into a nice time of the year, brighter, lighter, and lighter flavors. We actually hot cross buns in the tasting note as well on the back. So very, very, very appropriate for this time of year, definitely. And it was always kind of intended to be the kind of lightest of the set. And it was hard. This was such a tough act to follow. This was the kind of the tricky thing that once you're into in a set of bottles like this, actually pulling the cast together for that, I'd kind of had my idea of what that would be and how they'd come together. It's the same with this and the others, but it was that kind of little bit of concern where you come out with the next one and people would have preferred the first or whatever. And actually, they were very, very different, and of course people had their favourites, but actually I think largely it was preferred, with exception to Libby, of course. Sorry, Libby. But it was largely, I think, it was because it was just so bright and light, and actually the weather was really nice that spring, as it was that summer. Actually, that summer was really hot.
Yeah, I think, the tricky second album, but actually it worked out quite well. So, just Joe, you talked I'm just going to zip back a couple of sentences to what you were talking about with the wine casks. So, do you just want to talk to people a bit about STR and what STR means and why
sure.
they're now a bit of a staple part of our maturation process?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, we're referring with the STR is standing for shave, toast, rechar. And so they're as casks go that are used in the whiskey industry, very advanced. They've basically had a reconditioning process. So the ones that we're have been filling, they've held Rioja wine for 5 years. They are then the wine is emptied out. Okay, the cask is then taken back to the cooperage that we work with. Miguel and his guys then recondition it. So they'll take the ends off the cask. They'll then shave a few millimeters off the inside of the barrel. So they're removing this layer of really, really kind of wine-soaked oak, and they're also exposing new oak by doing that. It'll then get toasted and then recharred. Okay, so it's a lengthy process, but what it does is it just kind of it means that cask at that point then is really suitable for long-term whiskey maturation. If you didn't do that piece of work in terms of the shaving, toasting, recharring, and we just filled our spirit straight into that barrel, the wine influence would really be overwhelming. It would kind of, our new make spirit really, really kind of light, delicate, and fruity, and going straight into a cask that active with that much wine influence, it would just completely obliterate our distillery character. So they basically, they set these casks up, for whiskey maturation, and a long-term maturation as well. So not just a kind of a few months or a year or whatever. They're very advanced. They're pioneered. Our kind of whiskey consultant early on, our chap, the guy that helped enormously in the setup of Spirit of Yorkshire, Dr. Jim Swan. So he was massively important about kind of introducing the STR casks and working to get them out there, and I think we're not the only distillery filling them, but there's certainly not a huge number of them out there. And as I kind of mentioned before, we did release some for private ownership, so if anyone is interested in those, give it a shout. We can make that happen. But in terms of the series of bottlings, we filled 10 of these barrels back in 2016, and one of them made it into each of these. And then if you ever wanted to taste them just kind of on its own, outright, the 005 bottling was just a single STR barrel on its own, bottled on its own. So it was only kind of 544 bottles that it yielded out of that particular barrel. Of course, since then we got such good results, and so each year we filled some more. And over the last 12 months, we've been filling them for private ownership, but also filling some for ourselves as well. So when I've talked about this before, we often then get the question, "Oh, can I have one from 2016?" And the answer to that is just a categorical no, because there's only 3 left from 2016. So it means wine matured Yorkshire whiskey is super, super rare, like really, really rare, and always will be. It'll always be rarer than our kind of bourbon-led style. I hope does that sum it up, Jen? Does that help?
Yeah, that was actually very, very nice and concise. Well done.
Okay.
That was interesting. I learned a couple more things there as well, which is always good to know. So I think, and if there's anything else you want to add, Joe, then we can move on to a couple of questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
Super. Okay, so we've got an interesting question here from Darren, which is not sure if you're planning on doing a live tasting, but keen to buy samples. So this is something over the past few weeks we have been talking about and working out logistics for, and trying to figure out how we can do it. So we're a really small team, and how we can get that out and still do it to the high quality that we'd want to do it. If you've seen our labels, you'll know that we work really hard on making those look as beautiful as possible. And so we want to make sure that if we're sending out samples, it's not just a kind of scribbled on handwritten note, and how we manage to do that and still keep it looking nice and to the right kind of standards that we expect, and that I think that sort of customers have come to expect as well. So definitely keep watching this space for something around that, and there'll be a few things coming out in the next couple of weeks. Anything else for that one, Joe?
So yes, Darren, we will hopefully be putting something out there pretty soon.
Yeah. So yeah, and as ever, an unshameless plug for our newsletter. If you're not already on it, we do really try hard to make that full of actual news and events. And our newsletter subscribers really are the first people to hear about pretty much everything that we do. That's really exciting. So all new releases go out to cask owners and newsletter subscribers first before we ever release it to the public. For tastings and things like that, then newsletter subscribers will definitely be the first on the list to be hearing about that. So that's something to note. And then a different question was about old casks and what we do with old casks. Sorry, I'm just trying to find that now. So do we sell old casks, or are they reused? So could that create wood smoke for a barbecue smoker? Which I think is the kind of question that everyone's thinking about at the moment. Is, you can't really see behind me. I'm up at the farm at the moment. You can't really work because of the way that the angle is, but it's absolutely stunning up here, and it's 19 degrees on the coast this weekend, which is just lovely, really nice. So yeah, barbecue's top of mind. So
to answer your question, Sean, at the moment, any casks that we empty, we're keeping hold of them. There's still loads and loads and loads of flavour in those casks, and there's loads that we can do with them. So we don't kind of have a stack of casks that are just surplus to requirement. So if we're not filling them with whiskey again, we'll be giving them to Alex, Kate up at the brewery to get some beer in them. As well is something else that we're working on. So that's so basically we're still using them to create tasty beer and whiskey. However, your idea is solid. It's a really good idea. We did a piece of work with a brilliant little smokehouse near Beverley called Style Smokehouse. Remember this, Jen? We did this for the open day.
Yeah, I had some Style Smokehouse stuff for my lunch today, and it was outrageously good.
Yeah, it's really tasty stuff. But we gave Justin some staves from a barrel, which was one of very, very few barrels that we have, which we did strip down just to staves, and gave him some of those staves, and he smoked some fish with them, and it was beautiful. If you want old barrels to strip back and use for smoking and that kind of thing, I think you're better off just kind of hopping on online. If you hit someone up like Speyside Cooperage, okay, you're going to get a lot more oak than you'd ever need for a weekend's barbecuing. But you could definitely get an old whiskey barrel and have a go, and it won't break the bank either. But yeah, that's not something we have, sadly, but it's a great idea.
It is indeed. So we got another really nice comment from Andrew Chappell, which is about 003 and 004, as well as first release, but the favourite being 004. So that leads neatly into, so next week we're going to be talking all things farm on this programme. I don't know, it feels very strange to say that on this Facebook Live this time next week. But the following week we'll be looking at Distillery Project 003 and 004. And Distillery Project 003 was, we got a really great coup lately, which was in Jim Murray's Whiskey Bible. He gave our Distillery Project 003 95 out of 100, and the quote, which I just love, is "just ridiculously beautiful," which for a not quite baby whiskey, kind of not there, shouldn't really even be referred to as whiskey, to be in the Whiskey Bible 2020 with 95 was, we were just so proud of that. So
pretty amazing,
yeah.
Very happy with that.
Well done, Joe. You get good points for that one. You're welcome. So I think so I'll give a couple more seconds for any other questions, last minute questions to come in. We've had one from David, who's a good friend of the distillery, saying the Stahl gravel axe is amazing, and that is exactly what I had for my lunch today, and it was a massive treat and really good. So in a show of supporting other small local businesses who create things from a fantastic ethos, Stahl Smokehouse is definitely one to look out for. And to that end, we're going to have some stuff coming up with our sister company, World Top Brewery, who Joe mentioned earlier as well. And we're in talks with Shepherd's Purse Cheese as well to do something exciting with them over the next couple of weeks too. So just a great question from Paul Backhouse. So Paul, who's a a really good friend of the distillery too. Do you think that Spirit of Yorkshire will always marry their own casks, or would you think about collaborations with other English distilleries? So there's been so much chat about English distilleries at the moment. So that's a very pertinent question. Thank you, Paul.
That is a great question. Let's never say never. There's certainly nothing kind of concrete, and there's certainly nothing on the cards at the moment. But interestingly, what's really, really interesting on this point is, the English whiskey industry is growing, but about the distilleries that have come of age, we're all very different styles, and there's actually really across the various English whiskies, there's all the various components there to make a really, really brilliant, really well-rounded kind of tasty style of blended malt. So it's a great idea. Like I say never, but it's not something that we have planned for this year, let's say, or anything like that. But yeah, great, be brilliant to happen, I'd say.
Super. Okay, so another question here from Phil Jolly, who, interestingly, we have a Phil Jolly in the Mellor family, but I don't think it's the same Phil Jolly. So I've arrived late to this, but as a drinking collector, do we have some tasting notes? So Joe, do you want to just give a quick overview again for anyone who's come into this later about what 001 and 002? You've got a minute.
Yeah, so. I've got 1 minute, right? Okay, so they were very
phrase, but just not too long. That's all I mean.
All right. Okay, so you're not going to cut me off. Exactly. That's good. Good. So if you have just tuned in, so these were our two very earliest bottlings. This was released back in kind of winter 2017. This followed in the spring of 2018. They are long sold out. We don't have any stock of these. They do exist out in the kind of the whiskey auction world. They have crept up in the past. There might be the odd retailer who's got some. If you punch it into Google, you might find them. So they are out there. They're not impossible to get hold of, but they're not easy to get hold of. In terms of flavour and style, this was kind of more wood driven, more spicy. Quite happy to have a revisit on the tasting notes here. Talk about baked apple, vanilla custard, butterscotch, Battenberg cake, orange peel. Sounds great. And bang on, actually. Interesting. I can get away with that because I wrote these. And on the second one here, it was, as I mentioned earlier, it's closer to the style of whiskey that we are currently making and releasing. So this was a bit older than the first bottling, but it's still young stuff. It was still under 2 years old, and yeah, kind of lighter, more distillate-driven flavors. So for us, that's referring to a kind of cleaner, more citrus, more toffee. And we talked about hot cross buns earlier. It's that kind of thing. It's a bit more kind of bready and a bit kind of baking spice. It's kind of lighter, certainly lighter than this. So great spring style dramming if you have a bottle.
Super.
Okay.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Joe.
Well, there we are.
But yeah, and we've got one last thing, which is about cheese and whiskey tasting. So that's definitely something we're looking
right.
So we really are thinking hard on that one and working out some things. So keep an eye out if you're a newsletter subscriber or newsletters, and also on our social channels for a bit more information about that. So you might just notice here that Joe's just enhanced the bottle selection on his desk.
We're talking about casks, and that's an example of what we do with empty casks.
So that is a collaboration between us and the Wold Top Brewery, who are our sister company, based up here at the farm where I am at the moment. So that is a lovely, strong, very dark, very strong beer, Swell, which Alex and the team here brewed specifically to go well with the whiskey casks. And it really does. So it just kind of pulls in a lot of those woody flavors, and it tastes pretty amazing. Yeah, some nice love for Swell coming up on the comments there. But it is 12%, which is why it's in a 330 bottle, and we definitely advise drinking it with care because it's quite strong. It really is. But it tastes delicious. And so at the moment, there's only 6,000 bottles of that have been released. So that's selling really well. It's in a few different retailers around the county who are still able to sell, and it's also available from the World Top website, or if you're interested, it's available as part of our Whiskey Lovers Pack on our website if you're thinking about any presents for Father's Day coming up, or birthdays or something like that. I like that someone says, yep, Swell is best to sit down whilst drinking, which I think we would very much agree with too.
That's a good tip.
Yeah. Sitting down drinking is always quite useful anyway. I think it's just a bit more comfy. Anyway, I think we'll start wrapping things up there. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined us. It's good to see there's kind of a nice high count there of people watching, and for some of the lovely comments and questions that have been coming in at the side as well. So just a quick reminder, if you've only joined in late, I'm Jenny. I head up the marketing here at Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery, and alongside me here you've got Joe Clark, who is our whisky director. So every Wednesday we'll be back here, same time, same place, talking about slightly different things, but always connected through our filter bottle. So whether that's from the farm or stuff that's connected more to the distillery and the whiskey that you might have in front of you too. Last plug, which is that Moscatel and second release is still available on our website. So if you need something to keep you going through the bank holiday weekend, then head to spiritofyorkshire.com. And you'll be able to get that with the free UK mainland delivery. There we go. Beautifully done, Joe.
No problem. I've always got a bottle handy.
Excellent.
It's always handy.
Good to know. And there's some stuff behind me there as well if you want to have a look at what the carton looks like as well. So without further ado, I think we'll say thank you very much. And we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Bye. Welcome to filter bottle number 2. This is all about, this is focusing on the farm. So last week we had filter bottle number 1, which focused on distillery projects 001 and 002. For this week, we're taking a step away from the whiskey and moving more towards away from the bottle and moving more towards the whiskey. So you've got Jenny and Tom. So I'm Jenny. I'm joined by Tom, who is, he's the co-founder of the Spirit of Yorkshire, along with David, who I'm sure you've probably all seen on different Facebook Lives that we've been doing and videos that we've been doing lately as well. I'm Jenny. I head up the marketing here. Don't be fooled by the fact that we've got different surnames now. One of the reasons that we're able to sit this close together at the moment is that Tom is actually my dad, and we're all living together up at the farm at the moment. So that's just to set the scene and the precedent as to why we're actually together here and not on 2 separate screens. So today we're talking all about the farm and how we farm. So quick introduction, Tom and I are generations 3 and 4 of Mellors who farmed at Hammonby Grange, though it's negligible whether I could be called a farmer just yet. And what we're going to be doing is just talking you through a bit about the history of the farm, why we grow barley, why we farm in the way that we farm, and kind of how the farm's evolved over the past 75 years now. We'll touch across lots of different topics. As before, please feel free to just bob any comments into the comment section just underneath the screen here, and we'll be able to pick those up and put them on, and we'll ask them away. We might not ask them straight away. We'll wait until they're relevant, and possibly even wait until the end if that's necessary. So thanks very much. And without further ado, I think Tom, I'll be referring to him as Tom now, not Dad, because it sounds much nicer. Tom, you're welcome. Tom, would you like to talk to us a bit about the farm and how it started, and kind of why Hammonby Grange is in the Mellor family to start with?
Okay. Right. Well, first of all, welcome everybody. This is my first appearance on Facebook, so I'm a bit of a novice at this. Hopefully we'll get through it without too many mishaps. Yeah, as Jenny said, we're generations 3 and 4 sitting here in front of you now. My grandfather bought the farm at the end of the Second World War. He moved the whole family over from industrial West Yorkshire for a better life over on the Yorkshire coast. So they arrived here on the 1st of May 1945, and my granddad farmed until the end of 1950s, late 1959. My father then took over from him and farmed until the mid 80s when I came back from college, university in 1981, and really sort of took over, I suppose, towards the middle to the late 1980s. I've been farming it ever since, together with my wife Jill, and it's a traditional East Yorkshire farm, or right on the cusp of actually East and North Yorkshire. The boundary runs along the bottom of the farm. Traditional walled farm as well, on chalky hills. Originally, before the enclosures, this part of the world was known as the sheep walks, because it wasn't deemed to be fit enough or fertile enough for arable crops, but that sort of changed with increasing agricultural revolution back in the 1800s, and now is a traditional Yorkshire farm.
Okay, so one of the reasons that the distillery and actually the brewery, which came prior to the distillery, set up in the first place is because we've grown high quality malting barley here for decades. So I guess talk a bit more about why that chalky soil is so good. And actually I can just quickly jump in, and using one of the flashy things that's on here, I can just show quick, which we had to dig a big hole on the farm recently. And actually what it proved was a really good sort of strata level picture of how much chalk there is. So you can see that there really isn't very much topsoil on the top of it. It very quickly goes down into chalk, and that's good and bad for a variety of different reasons.
Yep. Malting barley traditionally likes thin calcareous soils. It doesn't really do particularly well for the malting or the brewing business on big heavy soils, although you can manipulate the inputs to overcome that. Normally you would end up with too much nitrogen in the grain, which would then lead to haze problems in beer, and also reduces the extract of alcohol that you can get out of a particular batch of grain. So we're witnessed by the fact that we've got two major maltsters right on our doorstep. One at Knapton, which is towards Malton, just right on the edge of the Yorkshire Wolds, on the Vale in the Vale of Pickering, and the other one is Muntons at Bridlington, which is just 10 miles away. Both of these two maltsters take an awful lot of barley from the Yorkshire Wolds and from elsewhere as well, and then export it literally all over the world. So it is recognised that this part of the world is one of the best areas for growing malting barley. As I said before, it likes thin calcareous soils, possibly droughty soils, and can withstand a bit of drought in the summer as well.
Yeah, so we're really free draining up here. So actually earlier in the year, when there were all the storms and there was so much standing water around, the Yorkshire Wolds we were in a really fortunate position because the fields drained quite quickly. So that wasn't really an issue for us. So now we could diverge into a couple of different paths. So let's just quickly talk about the type of barley that we're growing this year.
Or why we started.
We started
in the first place.
Yeah.
Well, back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, most of the farming industry was going through one of its cyclical downturns, and everybody was then starting to diversify and move their businesses in a different direction based on what they were good at and what the assets that they had. And that's, if you cast your mind back to that time, that's when most people started setting up farm shops, adding value to their own meat by butchering it, making cheese, converting barns into holiday cottages or commercial properties, setting up campsites, farm shops, delis, that sort of thing. And we were no different, really. And so I had to look at the enterprises that we had and the resources that we had on the farm. And of course, we just mentioned malting barley. The other thing that we do have is our own water supply. Now, most properties in the UK that have got their own water supply also have a main supply. But unfortunately, we don't have that. We've managed to evade the pipe laying people. I don't know quite how that happened, but we don't have mains water here. So we rely completely on borehole water, which is effectively sunk, which comes straight from the chalk.
In fact, I'm just going to jump in, because one of my other posh little overlays that I've managed to do, actually, you can't quite see it from here, but just hidden. So
that's relevant then, Jen.
Just hidden down in the fold of that dale down there is the pump house, or the original pump house on the farm that was sunk in 1937.
Yep.
And it's been providing water to us ever since, and still provides a significant part of the water that we use up here on the farm today. And then we have another much less pretty and idyllic looking one just at the top of the farm as well.
So at the end of 2001, 2002, we were looking for ways to diversify, and it occurred to me that we've got the two major elements or ingredients that we need to make a decent beer. And after some investigation with a consultant, looking into the possibility of being able to set up a brewery, and having done some market research on local towns and villages and cities around here, we set up the Woldtop Brewery in 2003. The aim was to add value to barley, effectively, and that's what we've been doing ever since. We produce a natural extension of that, of course, is then to move into distilling, because the first part of the brewing process and the first part of the malt distilling process are absolutely identical, effectively taking the sugar from the barley and converting it into alcohol, which then goes off in slightly different directions. So that's why we started, and that might be just a bit of useful background.
Yeah, so that's why the Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery came into being, and after the sort of initial idea nearly a decade ago now. The stills, you enlisted the help of Dr. Jim Swan and set up the stills, and all of that. The rest of that is history. But that's kind of taking us down into the distillery, which is something we'll cover off on topics on sort of future Wednesdays. So I guess now if we sort of cycle back to the barley, so why have we chosen the type of barley that we've chosen this year? Because there's lots of debate about different varieties.
Well, there's generally speaking, from a business point of view, you have to match the qualities of the barley for brewing and for distilling with the returns that you would get as a farmer. There's no point growing a particular variety that's got a small appeal, even though it might have a little niche following, if that means that the actual person that's growing that barley can't make a living. So it leads me, that would lead me on to a particular topic that I want to talk about later on in terms of sustainability, but not just environmental sustainability. So what we do is we look at the varieties that are grown specifically and have been bred specifically for brewing and distilling. Now, back in the 1960s, there was a fantastic variety called Marisotto came on the scene, and it really was groundbreaking because it was up to that point, all the malting varieties had been spring barley varieties, which were great for quality, but relatively low in yield. And so then the return to the farmer was not particularly great. And what they did, what the plant breeders did then was to take one of the best malting barleys around and spring barleys and mix it and breed it with a winter variety, and that brought Marisotto onto the scene. Marisotto was a great variety, and everybody was very, very pleased when that came along. And then it started to lose a bit of favour because of its disease resistance or its lack of disease resistance, even though it's a fantastic variety with which to brew. And it sort of fell out of favour, and then it was overtaken by other winter varieties. So going back, then there was Pearl and Halcyon as well. And we now have one or two other varieties that are grown in the winter, but predominantly we prefer to grow spring varieties. And so the varieties that we have been using up to press have been Concerto. For the last 4 or 5 years, we've grown Concerto, and it consistently has been the barley of choice of a lot of the distilleries up in Scotland, and also the brewers in the UK as well. Last year, we then decided to have a little experiment because there's some indication that Concerto has been superseded from a yield point of view by several other varieties, one of which is called Laureate, and that's what we have grown this year exclusively. But last year we did about 20%, 25% of our barley acreage with Laureate so that we could compare the two. And I'm afraid to say that Laureate out-yielded the Concerto by a considerable margin. And although they've got very similar distilling and brewing characteristics, from our point of view, the yield outweighs those other factors, all other things being equal. So from a farming point of view, it's no good continuing to grow Concerto if there's an alternative variety which can actually leave you a better return. And
also had a good impact on the whiskey as well. I think that's Dad's definitely talking about things there from a farming point of view, but we've really found that the Laureate seem to work better for the whiskey as well. And I know from looking at other distilleries and seeing what they're talking about at the moment at this time of year when people have been planting their spring barley, that it does seem like Laureate's being used quite consistently around the UK, including Scotland and England and Ireland. So I guess now if we move on to a bit more of the specifics, well, that was quite specific too. Sorry if specific barley varieties aren't always your cup of tea. So a bit about the farm. So how people have farmed has obviously changed exponentially in the last century, especially even when you look at things from sort of harvesting practices during World War II and through to now. So we're doing things quite differently this year, or we're trialing things in quite a different way this year. Yep. So why don't you talk a bit more about that?
Okay. I suppose traditionally the idea of ploughing the land, turning it over so that you could have basically a fresh, clean start and bury the residue from the previous crop, which would then get imbibed into the soil, has been around for a long, long period of time. And when I was growing up, there was an old boy who works on the farm with us, and he had first started ploughing with horses in the 1920s, and had then seen everything through after the Second World War, and slightly before that, the introduction of tractors and things like that. And I learned to plough with him on a single one-way plough, setting rigs and then taking out the furrows at the end of the particular rigs. And it's a bit of a labour of love, is that? And a lot of people still do it, and there are great competitions and are fantastic ploughmen and such. But it's not the easiest of things to do. And so the next logical step was then to have a reversible plough, which meant that you could just turn it over at the end and continue ploughing along the same mark rather than having to set the rigs and furrows. And of course, when you do that, the plough then becomes a little bit heavier, and so you need a slightly bigger tractor to pull it. And then because you've got a slightly bigger tractor to pull it, you need to go a little bit deeper, and you go a little bit wider, and you try to get more done in a day. So then you put an extra furrow on the back of the plough, and all of a sudden you end up with a great big tractor pulling a great big plough and turning over huge amounts of soil. Now that's been fine, and that's how we've been led to believe that's the right way to do it. The old boys right at the very beginning didn't plough more than about 2 inches deep, which today, in today's parlance, would be called minimally tilling the soil. And so we've got into this situation where you can end up with the weight of the tractor causes some sort of compaction in the subsoil, and then you've got to go slightly deeper. You've got to break that up. And so we've been disturbing more and more tons of soil on the surface for the last 30, 40 years increasingly, and we've been no exception to that. We've done exactly the same thing. We're now starting to look at whether that's a real way forward, especially as with all the talk of climate change. Every time you turn over the soil, you get mineralization of carbon and also nitrogen as well. And effectively, the carbon goes off into the atmosphere that has been locked in the soil, and the nitrogen, if there's no crop growing there, will actually effectively head south and go down into the water supply. So there's lots and lots of work going on these days, right at the moment, across agriculture. Very exciting times about exploring different ways of not tilling the soil or minimally tilling it, and also using cover crops to sequester carbon and to gather nitrogen during the period when the barley crop is not growing. Spring barley crop is in the ground for between 16 and 20 weeks of the year, which means that the rest of the year, the field is effectively empty. I know that's probably not a technical expression that anybody would want to have, but effectively that's it. So the idea of leaving bare stubbles after harvest and ploughing in the autumn and leaving the upturned soil to overwinter was great for making a frost mold and for actually breaking the soil down, but actually is now not considered to be quite as environmentally friendly as was once thought. So what we've done over the last couple of years is that, first of all, we've not removed any straw from the crop after the harvest. We've just chopped it and we've then incorporated it into the soil. We've mixed it into the top of the soil, and then we've sown what's called a cover crop after that. So it's almost like a sort of intermediate crop between crops of spring barley. And generally speaking, that consists of things like legumes, certain cereals, phacelia, radishes and that sort of thing, all doing a slightly different job, either sequestering nitrogen from the atmosphere and also taking in nitrogen from the atmosphere as well and putting that into the root system and locking it up in the soil, which can then be used, generally speaking, to build up the soil for fertility for the following crops. It's been an interesting exercise, and over the last 2 or 3 years we've struggled with establishing the cover crop, because at the time of year when you've just harvested the spring barley, it tends to be very dry, and so we lack a little bit of moisture. And these crops, very small seeds, require quite a bit of moisture just to get them going and up and running. And I think we could safely say that in trying to do things the way that we've always done them with the machinery that we've always had, we've ended up losing moisture and almost being self-defeating by spending more money and getting a worse result. So now this last year, we've actually just direct drilled straight into the residue of the crop with a cover crop, and we now have gone through, once that cover crop has been destroyed in the spring, we're now gone through and just direct drilled straight into that as well with next year's spring barley. It's an interesting experiment, and I'm not 100% sure whether we've got it right yet, but we're trying.
So so just before you panic, that that we might have just experimented too much with all of our barley crop. We've actually only done a percentage of the barley crop has been direct drill, and the other percentage has been I guess conventionally established. So we're going to have some really interesting results to compare at the end of the year, also post harvest, to see what's happened and measuring the amount of carbon that's captured and everything like that. So be prepared come the autumn to hear quite a lot more about that and the results. And we promise we'll be honest.
We will, absolutely.
Like
Absolutely.
Yeah, regardless of which way it seems to have gone. So that's kind of how we're farming at the moment and what we're thinking about, and that all ties into that overall distillery ethos that we have, which is about respecting tradition but doing things our own way. Dad's laughing.
I'm just looking at one of my old university chums' questions.
I know, that's why you weren't supposed to look at those. So sorry if it looks like we're looking at the screen. We've got the comments coming up at the side just so that we can keep an eye on what's going on. So again, if you've got any questions as we're going through things, I know there was a lot of words there. Like sequestering and all about carbon and nitrogen and stuff. So if you want anything more explaining, then or just drop a comment in here and we'll chat through it in a second. So you mentioned just a bit further ago about sustainability.
Yep.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, obviously there's the there's the traditional sustainability that everybody thinks about in terms of the environment, which is absolutely hugely important. Making sure that we've got a planet that's fit for the next generation and for the next crops even is absolutely paramount from a farming point of view. We'd be silly not to think about it like that, because whilst we can do with a lot of things, we can do without a lot of things. I'm pretty sure we could do without iPhones and Android phones or quite a few other things and people that I could mention, professions that I could mention. You can't do without food. So it's really important that we look after that. But it goes further than that, as far as I'm concerned. There are other sustainabilities that you have to think about in terms of the farm and also running a joined-up business like the farm and the brewery and the distillery. And that's you've got to look at the sustainability of the people as well that you employ. You've also got to look at the sustainability of the product. How replicatable is that? Can we make sure that it's consistent? Can we get the right staff, of course, to make sure that it's consistent? And finally, you've got to make sure that the business is sustainable as well, because if it's built on a wing and a prayer, effectively undercapitalized, or it doesn't have certain things in place to be able to make sure that you can continue, both financially and from a workplace point of view, then I'm afraid it all falls on its head, and it's just it can very easily just degenerate into a hobby. So I'm very passionate about all of that.
Definitely. So just to tie into that as well, so Tom's been talking about sustainability of the land, and another thing that we've always been focused on here is about wind power. So you can't really tell tonight because it's an absolutely glorious evening. It's a bit chilly actually, but an absolutely glorious evening. And today we've had sleet and hailstones and every type of weather. Yeah. But just this evening the winds dropped and the sun came out for a bit, although it really is still very cold. I think I was a bit optimistic setting us up out here. So one of the things that we've always focused on is wind power. So we first had planning permission for wind turbines back in the 1990s, but the proximity to a big RAF base meant that that wasn't possible and feasible then. Then I think since the mid 2000s we've had 2 smaller wind turbines, and they've provided a significant amount of energy now, both to the farm and to the brewery. And we're constantly working out ways whether we can capture that and use that for the distillery too, but maybe that's just a bit too far away. Yeah, at the moment. And then something else to add just onto what Tom was talking about with direct drilling is all of these trials are trying to get us to a way that we can start talking properly about a carbon neutral, or firstly a carbon neutral barley. So we're trying to walk before we can run, and also maybe even a carbon negative barley, which means that we can actually take carbon in and use that to offset it against some of the production processes that we've got. Yeah, and then that can therefore in itself lead in the future to a carbon neutral beer and then a carbon neutral whiskey as well. So those are our grand ambitions at the moment for all of this trialing that we're doing. It's not just about the farm itself, but it's definitely about how that affects the whiskey and the beer too. Yeah.